This afternoon, I want to take us back, way back into time, exactly 54 years ago, when James Brown penned the words, "This is a man's world." Brown's intention was to capture his view of what a man's world is like. But you know what I discovered today, and it really made me so happy as a leader in trade unionism, that these words were actually penned by a woman. And her name is Betty Newsom. And in this lyrics, it says that this is a man's world. Brown, together with Betty, not only once reiterated that this is a man's world, but actually repeated the lyrics, consistently saying that this is a man's world, this is a man's world, but it would mean nothing without a woman and a girl. Being in the PSA as one of the leaders has really taught me and made me realize indeed that this is a man's world. If you look at our board of directors, we only have 2 female leaders. And if you look at Congress is largely made out of a majority of men chairpersons, and in the minority we have our women. But today I want to encourage us as women in the workplaces, young women, young people coming up being members of the PSA. I want to encourage us to say that indeed, yes, we can look back 54 years ago when Ben, together with this remarkable woman, Betty Newsom, penned the words, "This is a man's world." But I want to say to us today, it means nothing without a woman or a girl. So, as a leader in the GPSSBC Gauteng, I am also surrounded by majority men. Our branch makes out largely of men. But today, I want to say to you, it's not just a man's world. It means everything with us in it.
My name is Siwe Sosibo. I am a candidate attorney at Mhlanga Incorporated, and I'm currently doing my first year of articles. I've been asked to speak a bit about the Domestic Violence Act of South Africa and the protections that it affords to the women of this country. Domestic violence against women is a serious and ongoing issue in South Africa. More recently, in fact, gender-based violence in particular has been rightly labelled as a second pandemic, as women's lives have increasingly been ruined and even ended at the hands of their partners, mostly men. So one of the main features of the Domestic Violence Act, and what will be the basis of this presentation, is the protection order. This is because the protection order happens to be the primary protection mechanism or legal protection that is offered in terms of the Domestic Violence Act. Although we'll go into more detail later on the procedural elements and the definitional elements when it comes to getting a restraining order, in broad terms, what a protection order or restraining order does is allow the victim of domestic violence to get protection against an abuser. And what this protection does is come in the form of an order. The order will prohibit the abuser from committing more acts of domestic violence against the victim. And if the abuser does commit an act of domestic violence against the victim, which is prohibited in terms of the protection order, the abuser can then be arrested and taken to court for disobeying the said order. So now I'm just going to go through the requirements, so what needs to be satisfied in order for a victim to get the protection order according to the Act. So the first requirement is that the victim must show that she is in a domestic relationship with the respondent being the abuser. The second requirement is that once number 1, which is domestic relationship, has been established, the victim must then show that an act of domestic violence has occurred. So although the terms domestic relationship and domestic violence are defined in broad terms in the definition section, which is section 1 of the Domestic Violence Act, I thought it would be useful to go through what the terms actually entail. Firstly, what is a domestic relationship? So a domestic relationship means a relationship between the complainant, the victim, and the respondent, the abuser, in any of the following ways. A, they are married to each other, and this includes marriage according to any law, custom, or religion. B, whether they are the same or opposite sex, so it's very liberal, live together in a relationship in the nature of a marriage, although although they are not or were not married to one another. C, you and that person, so the abuser and the victim, share responsibilities for a child. In that instance, and this makes this very interesting, is that you don't need to be the natural adoptive parent or even the legal guardian of the child, but you could be, but it's not necessary in terms of the acts in order for you to get protection and be labeled as being in a domestic relationship. D, so you've been considered to be in a domestic relationship if you are family members, or if the abuser and the victim are in an engagement, dating, or in a customary relationship, including an actual or perceived romantic, intimate, or sexual relationship of any duration. So it's, the kids call it like a situationship, I think that's what they say. So even if you are in a perceived relationship or have been in a relationship for a week, you would qualify as being in a domestic relationship and then be able to get protection in terms of the Domestic Violence Act. And then the last category is that the abuser and the victim share or recently shared the same residence. So if you fall into any of those categories, you'll be classified as being in a domestic relationship. And that's part A of the requirements that have to be satisfied. And then the second part, if you'll remember, is that you have to show that there was an act of domestic violence which was committed against you as the victim. Again, domestic violence is described in Section 1 of the Act in very broad terms, and I'll just go into more detail into what those actual abuses are, because I think it's important. You'll see there's a lot of overlaps, and just for like an in-depth understanding of these terms, I felt it was important. You're experiencing domestic violence if a person that you are in a domestic relationship with does one or more of these things to you. So there's physical abuse, and I'm sure we know what this is, but it's when the person harms you physically. So this is things like beating you, slapping you, punching you, choking you, stabbing, scratching, burning, even shooting you. The second one is sexual abuse, and this is when the person harms you sexually, so it includes acts of rape, sexual assault. The third is emotional abuse, and this is when the person harms you emotionally by saying things on purpose that will hurt your feelings, or shouting at you and calling you bad names. You could even be doing or saying things that make you feel bad about yourself, or make you feel scared, like threatening to take your child away from you if you divorce them, or threatening to hurt you physically. Psychological abuse is when the person harms you psychologically, and this could be done by the abuser saying or doing things to you on purpose to affect your mental or psychological state of mind. So he could be undermining you, making you feel like you're a worthless person without any dignity. Verbal abuse, this is when the person harms you verbally by swearing at you, calling you bad names, maybe shouting at you constantly for petty things, or even if it's big things, but yeah. There's economic abuse, and this is when the person harms you economically or financially. So an example of this could be if your partner uses money to try to control you or your behavior. So he could maybe steal your money or your belongings, or refuse to buy your kids food, or pay the kids school fees, or even refuse to give you money to buy like groceries unless, for example, you stop seeing your friends. I'll give you an ultimatum, like if you go out with your friends tonight, then you and the kids will not be eating, for example. That would be economic or financial abuse. Another act of domestic violence is intimidation, and this is when the person threatens to hurt or harm you, your children, your friends, or your family if you do not do what the person wants. What could also be labeled as intimidation is if your abuser, your partner, bullies you, scares you, or puts you under pressure to do or not do something. So from this you can see there's an overlap with intimidation and psychological, emotional, and verbal abuse. So what this means is that psychological, emotional, and verbal abuse can also be intimidation. Stalking is also characterized as an act of domestic violence, and stalking is basically when the person you are in a domestic relationship with follows you around or watches you all the time, and you don't want him to be sitting outside your house at night and just watching you. That would be considered as stalking. And then there is harassment, and this is similar to stalking in the sense that it's when the person again watches you, follows you all the time, or even goes as far as sending you unwanted letters or messages on your phone and emails, and just constantly does these acts, strange things, even after you've asked them to stop. Damage to property is also then labeled as a category which falls under an act of domestic violence, and this is when the person damages or destroys your belongings on purpose. So for example, your abuser could break your things, destroy or spoil your personal things, break into your house or wherever you stay. It basically comes into your property that you do not share with that person, and they come in without your invitation or agreement and they damage your stuff. So this behavior will be characterized as abusive or harmful, as it affects your safety and your health and your well-being. Okay, so we've covered the first and the second requirement that have to be satisfied in order to get a protection order, and now we move on to the third one, and this says that once the victim has met the requirements 1 and 2, so they've proven that they are in a domestic relationship and that an act of domestic violence is committed against them by the person that they're in a domestic relationship with, then the victim may approach a police station or a court of law to apply for a protection order. Although I know there are a lot of reasons why victims may delay reporting their instances of domestic violence, while I was researching for this, I saw that there's a lot of research that says that the main reason that there are delayed instances of reporting is because there's still the belief that what happens in one's household, which is usually where the acts of domestic violence occur, so there's a belief that what happens in the household is a private matter and should be dealt with the parties in that home that are immediately involved in that drama and that abuse, so to speak. So ultimately there's just a fear on the part of the victim that the people assisting them won't believe them, or they don't have the right to go to those people, or it's not acceptable for them to go speak to outsiders about their situation. Of course, that is not true, and the victim is entitled to seek protection from the police. In fact, Section 2 of the Act goes to the heart of those potential concerns, and it states that police officers have a direct and express duty to assist the victim of domestic violence by referring them to a court which is responsible for protection orders. So this is usually the court which forms part of the family court section. So police officers then have a duty to inform the victim of their rights to even institute criminal proceedings against their abuser. What usually happens in practice is that the victim approaches the clerk of the court, who will talk the victim through the process. The victim will then have to tell the clerk of the court what their situation is, and the clerk will record the victim's testimony, so what the victim is saying. Once this is done, the police, sometimes with the assistance of the applicant, but not necessarily, will serve papers on the respondent or the alleged abuser. What these papers will do is then call on the abuser to go to court on a specified date. The date will be on the papers. And then when the alleged abuser goes to court, what they are doing essentially is showing cause or reasons as to why the victim should not be granted a final protection order. So what is important in wrapping up this entire process is that there is a return of service which is filed, okay? A return of service is a document or a piece of paper which is proof that the news actually reached the alleged abuser. So it's very important that this is filed so that the parties are aware that the entire process has been wrapped up and that the abuser has been served with the papers and they know to come to court. And so up to this point we have dealt with the procedural aspects relating to obtaining an interim protection order. And interim protection orders are dealt with under Section 5 of the Domestic Violence Act. So the reason why it's called an interim protection order is simply because it's the order that will give the victim protection from the abuser temporarily before the final protection order is granted. The requirements we set out earlier have to be met, and those have been discussed. Another important fact is that the alleged abuser does not have to be notified about the interim protection order. This is very important because it demonstrates how immediate the protection given to the victim is. So once the interim protection order has been served on the abuser, that's if the victim has legal protection up to the date when they appear in court and they state their cases, and then whatever events unfold after that. Another important point is that the interim protection order must be accompanied by a stayed warrant of arrest. This means that if the alleged abuser contravenes the terms of the protection order, they would have committed a criminal offence. The abuser will then be required to appear in the criminal court before a magistrate, and they might be sent up to jail for a period of up to 5 years, or they could be ordered to pay a fine, or both, so it's prison and you pay up. It's important that the complainant or the victim goes to the police station immediately, or calls the police and reports the contravention to them. What usually happens is that the police will ask the victim to make an affidavit which explains how and when the abuser contravened the protection order. The police will then go arrest the abuser, best case scenario, if they believe that the abuser is going to abuse you more and cause you serious harm if the abuser is not arrested. Again, it's important for the victim to make sure that not a lot of time has passed between the contravention and when they actually report the contravention. If the police don't arrest the abuser, they must give him a notice to appear in court for contravening the terms of the protection order. According to Section 5.5 of the Act, the interim protection order is only valid until the return date. So the return date is the date on which the victim and the alleged abuser must appear in court to state their respective cases. So the applicant will state her case to the court as to why the interim should be made final, and then the alleged abuser will then respond and tell his side of the story. If the alleged abuser makes a strong case, the order will not be made final and the interim protection order will essentially just be set aside. Section 6.3 states that the alleged abuser is not allowed to cross-examine the victim directly. So this is, you can see there's a lot of victim protection which is entrenched in this act. The alleged abuser may only cross-examine the victim through the court. So if the abuser elects to have a legal representative on the return date when they have to appear before the magistrate, then that legal representative may cross-examine the victim. Okay, so that's it, I think, for interim protection. Okay. So Section 6.5 deals with final protection orders, and it shows the difference between the final protection order and the interim protection order in a sense, because it states, and this is Section 6.5 of the Domestic Violence Act, requires that the final protection order be served on the abuser. So remember before we spoke about how the interim protection order does not need to be served, it gives protection to the victim relatively immediately. The final protection order will still give that same protection, if not stronger. However, it is important that the final protection order is served on the abuser. The last few points that I want to make about protection orders relates to the changing or the stopping of the entire protection order, or changing some of the terms by adding or removing certain terms of the protection order. So the protection order stops when you go to court and withdraw or cancel it, or it can be stopped when the court sets it aside. A protection order can be used on several occasions for several years without being terminated. You can change the terms of your protection order, so you can, for example, if the victim has since moved to a new house or their place of work has changed, and when they made the application there was a term in the protection order saying that the abuser cannot come to their place of work and intimidate them or harass them or stalk them. So if there's a change in address, then you can make an application to the domestic violence clerk of the magistrate court, and they will make that amendment to protection order. The abuser may also apply to court to ask for the protection order to be set aside. It's strange, yes, but it can happen. And the court will only listen to the abuser's application if the court is satisfied that the victim has been notified to come to court. Okay, so the abuser cannot interfere and just change the terms unilaterally without the victim being notified of his intention to change the terms of the protection order. I'm almost at the end, but I just felt it was important to point out the fact that although the Domestic Violence Act is a very important piece of legislation, I think it's one that was also very welcomed in South Africa because it enables victims of domestic violence to realise their rights and get protection from the state, which then ultimately allows them to reclaim their dignity. I think it's important for us to remember that the legislation and the victims themselves don't operate in isolation. What I mean by this is that there is a direct duty, as I pointed out earlier, as well on every person that is involved in this process of reporting, such as the clerks, the police officers, the magistrates, etc. They all have a duty to assist the victims in any way that they can when it comes to them realising their rights in terms of this legislation. Again, the police especially have a huge role to play when it comes to domestic violence issues because they are usually the first point of call. We've spoken about the fact that the Domestic Violence Act itself says that the police have certain duties, and there are other documents like the Service Charter for Victims that tell the police how to treat the victims of domestic violence. Police officers have a duty to respect the victim that is coming to report these abuses, and they have a duty to treat the victim with kindness, and if they can't manage kindness, at the very least professionalism. When it comes to domestic violence, this is what you can expect the police to do for you. So you, as the victim, have the right to ask the police officers for their names and their badge numbers, and they have to give you those details if you ask for them. The police officers have to take your statement when you report the domestic violence at the police station. They don't have discretion to decide whether they're going to listen to you or not. They have to take your statement. If the victim phones the police and calls them and needs them to come to the place where they are staying, the police have to respond to that call and they have to come to the place where the abuse happened. Police have to help you get medical treatment and or give you the details of places where you can go get counselling and shelter. They have to tell you about your rights in terms of the Domestic Violence Act in a way that you understand. They also have to tell you about your right to lay a criminal charge against the abuser. Whether you're going to use the Domestic Violence Act or not, laying a criminal charge or going through criminal proceedings is an option that the victim has to be made aware of, especially if there's been an allegation of rape or sexual assault or intent to do grievous bodily harm or intimidation. The next thing is that the police have to take away any firearm or dangerous weapon that the abuser might have with him that is a threat to the victim. Then lastly, they have to arrest the abuser if the abuse is serious and if you're going to be physically harmed if the abuser is not arrested. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope I was able to relay the information concisely and in a way that you'll be able to understand. Really did learn a lot by doing the research here, and I hope what I've said will enable you to understand the act more clearly, and then whoever needs will be able to utilize it in a way that's effective. I have a lot of faith in this piece of legislation, and I believe that if all the role players involved are able to understand and actually work within the bounds of this legislation, then it could offer a lot of protection to individuals that find themselves in these horrible situations. So, yeah, thank you.
As we celebrate and dedicate August to the women in our society, I am reminded of the historic march of 20,000 women to the Union Buildings in Pretoria on 9 August 1956. Women who fearlessly stood up against the country's past laws then. It was a peaceful protest, but it made significant difference. So much so that this country is still commemorating this day as a public holiday every year. Women faced a lot of challenges then, and today still do. Remarkable progress has been made in the upliftment of women, but yet there are still evils such as domestic violence and sexual harassment in the workplace. COVID-19 pandemic hit us earlier this year, and it hit us quite hard. In the front line were some of our women workers who had to face this battle against this pandemic and still had to go to their homes and comfort their families. Remarkable women, we salute them. South Africa and PSA have wonderful women, strong, not afraid to take on battles. And that is why my message today to each and every woman out there, and especially to the women of PSA, to always believe in yourself, be assertive and demand your rights. Believe in who you are and what you can accomplish, because you can if you just believe in yourself. Stay strong, demand your rightful place in society and in this country, and always remember, you are blessed and you are unique because you are God's creation. Amandla.
To all the women of South Africa, as we celebrate the Women's Month, I have a message for you. Let's stand up and fight against violence, because each and every day women are being killed. Let's celebrate this month by being brave and stand for ourselves. At workplace, there's a lot of men who are short-sword. We are always afraid and being pulled back by our fears. Let's all stand up and fight for our rights. Women, you have the power. You strike a woman, you strike a rock. Amandla.
I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I'm an aunt, and most of all, I am the woman of South Africa in the PSA. South Africa has been faced with the pandemic of COVID-19, where we find challenges in our hospitals, clinics, EMS departments, and our departments of social development. We also face women abuse, where it has been a challenge in so many societies and communities. As the women of PSA, we want to remind every woman that remember that you've got a self-worth, remember that you've got a purpose, and honesty starts with yourself, where you need to admit that no, this is not my worth, this is not my purpose, and strive for what you are meant to be. As the women of PSA, we would like to wish every woman in South Africa a happy Women's Month. Stay safe and take care of yourselves.
Now, Women's Day celebrates all the achievements of women over centuries, the sacrifices they made, the endurance, the commitment they've shown to better their lives and that of their families and even their colleagues. But rather than speaking to you about the history of Women's Day, I'd like to share the following with you, and I've seen it happen often over the 35 years that I've been a working woman. We, as ladies, have the tendency to tear each other down, especially in the workplace, instead of pulling each other up and making each other shine. And I'd like to read the following poem for you to illustrate. What terrifies me most is how we foam at the mouth with envy when others succeed, but sigh in relief when they are failing. Our struggle to celebrate each other is what's proven most difficult in being human. Ladies, and we can all attest to that. G.D. Anderson said, feminism isn't about making women strong. Women are already strong. It's about changing the way the world perceives that strength. So I would like to call on all of us ladies to support each other and to lift each other up where we can, to not tear each other down, but to fix each other's tiaras.
Women's Month is an opportunity to celebrate and reflect on women's achievements, as well as the problems they have faced in the struggle to be free, and the important role they continue to play in the society. Ladies, most of you have no idea how beautiful you are. Don't let mean words from an insecure soul blind you from the truth of your beauty. You are beautiful just the way you are. Happy Women's Month.
I am pleased to join all women in celebrating us on this Women's Month. As we are all aware that the violence against women is a serious and escalating evil in our society. It is both a part of the subordination of women as a consequence of the inequalities in our society. The statistics, even though they are not fully revealed, are shocking. It is painful to know that many of the victims are being abused by their male partners or colleagues at their homes and workplaces, respectively. Women are losing their lives in hands of men. I therefore make a plea to all women out there that we must not tolerate abusive behavior. Let us support each other as women in times of need. Learn to trust and confide in each other. Protect our sisters, mothers, and the girl child. Women are strong. You strike a woman, you strike a rock. Let us speak with a clear and united voice. All power to women in South Africa. I thank you.
Greetings, South Africa and the world. Thank you, PSB, for having me. My name is Lucia Archer. This is Africa Club 2019. I play a part ambassador in Great South Africa, social entrepreneur, a businesswoman, founder and owner of Othe Static Clinic. I am a former immigration officer that served the Department of Home Affairs for 9 years. Resigned in 2009 and went back to school. 2014 I established my business. If it wasn't for the women of South Africa, the women in the world, the women that stood by me, I wouldn't be the woman that I am today. What this has taught me as a young woman, it has taught me that if we stand together as women, we are able to achieve anything that we want to achieve. If we stand together as women, we are stronger. But if you stand alone, you are weaker. Thank you once again, women of South Africa. Let's continue to be like the women of 1956. Stand together and fight against challenges that we are facing, like gender-based violence, like inequality. I would like to say Happy Women's Month. Together we are stronger, alone not.
To say it helps to always remind ourselves that forgiveness is for our own healing and peace. It's not about the offender. If we can forgive and we can get rid of that burden for ourselves, we can move forward. And I think that is the message that I want to give, is that forgiveness is not for the offender, but it's for ourselves. And I think to a certain extent, it also applies to women in the workplace. You know, we very hard on ourselves in the workplace, and critics, if people critique us on our actions and things like that. And we walk around with that for many years and many days, and that person has forgotten long ago what they said to you. But we have to forgive and we have to forget. And that is how we move forward.
My fellow comrades and sisters of the PSA, may I take this opportunity first and foremostly of wishing you all a happy Women's Month. So as we engage our Women's Month activities for this year, for this month in particular, I wish to highlight the fact that for years we keep hearing about the non-stop violence and harassment of millions of South African women. We are told horrifying statistics, such as that in South Africa, a woman is murdered every 3 hours. 1 in 3 women have been raped, and 1 in 5 women have faced harassment at the hands of their partners. So in response to this year in particular, many leaders across the sectors have called for change. They've adopted hashtags and they've tried awareness campaigns, but words are simply not enough. This year needs to be a year of concrete action. Instead of simply calling for change and running awareness campaigns, we need to work together to implement real strategies and systems that can counter harassment and violence. A big part of this fight is for effective harassment policies, training and equipping police to handle gender-based violence crimes, and most importantly updating our legislation so that the systems that are in place are able to be dismantled, because they need to be replaced with systems that can in actual fact counter it. So if I can call on everybody at the PSA, within FEDUSA, to society at large, to do just one action this Women's Month, is to support the campaign for ILO Convention C190. a convention that introduces mechanisms into law that will not only make it more difficult for gender-based violence, crimes and harassment to take place, but equally so to introduce mechanisms to protect survivors of harassment and violence. It is only through these types of interventions that we can finally turn the tide on harassment and violence, particularly in the home and at work. So may I once again take the opportunity to wish you all a happy Women's Month, and please do everything possible in order to eliminate the scourge that has beset our society. God bless.
The PSA, as a representative union to thousands of female public servants, remains committed to protect and promote the rights and interests of these members. During 2020, female workers continue to be exposed to additional and unexpected challenges, compounded by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. A recent report by GEMS shows that 74% of female members tested positive for COVID-19 compared to 26% of male members. The report also indicated that these cases were reported from female-dominated departments such as health and social development and education. The statistics point at women remaining more vulnerable in the workplace. The extended lockdown period to curb the spread of the virus saw a distressingly steep increase in violence against women, with many incidents still going unreported. The PSA recently lost one of its passionate female shop stewards in Gauteng after she was brutally raped and murdered. The United Nations described this worldwide increase in domestic abuse as a shadow pandemic alongside COVID-19, with statistics showing an increase of 20% in violence, with victims often being trapped at home with their abuser. The pandemic of abuse is, however, not only a personal matter behind closed doors. Studies have confirmed that it has a ripple effect and impact on the victim's workplace performance, including time off to cover physical signs of abuse or for attending legal proceedings. Physical abuse is not only a battle faced by women. Despite gains made to empower them in the workplace, women remain underrepresented at senior management level within the public service and vulnerable to workplace harassment. With all the programs touted by government, many still fear reporting matters impacting them in a space where the legal obligation falls on the employer to ensure their safety. The PSA has been a custodian of female workplace rights for more than 100 years, achieving major successes to ensure the equality of women in the public service workspace. As we celebrate Women's Month 2020, the PSA calls on government to allocate more resources towards supporting women in the workplace, especially the survivors of abuse. In addition, the PSA appeals to government to implement a formal legislation to protect women who perform atypical jobs that too often subject them to exploitation, and to intensify efforts to protect South African women against various forms of abuse.